Fix this. $100 million is yours, laughed the Arab billionaire as his skyscraper shook in the sky. The 11-year-old girl in torn cargo pants didn't laugh back. She just asked for the wrench. Before we continue, drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. Sheikh Hamdan Al Maktoum could feel the floor vibrating under his $12,000 Italian leather shoes. That wasn't supposed to happen. Not 600 meters above Dubai. Not in a building held up by nothing but invisible magnetic force. The Sky Pearl wasn't just the most expensive architectural project in human history, it was supposed to be impossible. A massive diamond-shaped luxury complex, 40,000 tons of gold-plated glass and titanium, levitating above the city with no pillars, no cables, no supports. Just pure electromagnetic force, suspending an entire building in midair like a magic trick that cost $12 billion to perform. Except today, the magic was dying. The observation deck stretched out before Hamdan like the bridge of a starship, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view that made billionaires weep. Below, Dubai shimmered in the heat, the city that his family had built from sand and ambition. Above, the sky was that particular shade of burning blue that only existed in the desert, and all around him the air conditioning system hummed at a frequency that was making his teeth hurt. That hum was wrong. Hamdan had spent 3 years listening to this building. He knew every sound it made. The magnetic coils were supposed to create a harmonic resonance, a perfect C major chord that the engineers called the Song of Stability. It was the sound of 847 superconducting electromagnets working in perfect synchronization, each one generating enough force to lift a commercial airliner, but right now the Pearl wasn't singing, it was screaming. "Your Highness!" Dr. Werner Kruger appeared at Hamdan's elbow, and the German engineer looked like he was about to vomit. Sweat poured down his face despite the aggressive air conditioning. His hands shook as he thrust a tablet toward Hamdan. "The oscillation is increasing. We have a drift of 4.2 degrees. Hamdan stared at the holographic display projected above the tablet. Red warning lines crept across the screen like blood spreading through water. The building was tilting, slowly but definitely tilting. "If we hit 5 degrees," Kruger continued, his accent getting thicker with panic, "the magnetic lock breaks, the fail-safes disengage, and the Pearl falls." The words hung in the recycled air. Falls, 40,000 tons of luxury apartments, gold fixtures, and his family's reputation, plummeting into the heart of Dubai like a missile made of hubris. Hamdan walked to the edge of the observation deck where the floor transitioned to transparent aluminum. He could see straight down through 600 meters of empty air to the city below. They'd already evacuated 3 city blocks. He could see the tiny figures of people running, cars abandoned in the streets, emergency vehicles forming a perimeter around the impact zone. His father, King Rashid Al Maktoum, was scheduled to land on the Pearl's rooftop helipad in exactly 4 hours. The inauguration ceremony was supposed to be broadcast live to 47 countries. The king would stand in this very room and declare the Al Maktoum family's greatest achievement, proof that Arab engineering and vision could make the impossible real. Instead, Hamdan was about to give his father a front-row seat to the family's greatest humiliation. "Fix it," Hamdan said, his voice low and dangerous. He turned to face Kruger and the cluster of terrified engineers huddled around the main control console. "I have poured $12 billion into this project. I hired the best minds from MIT, from Tokyo, from Berlin. I brought you here, Werner, because they told me you were a genius." He stepped closer. "So explain to me why my building is trying to commit suicide." Kruger's fingers flew across his keyboard, pulling up diagnostic screens that meant nothing to Hamdan but clearly terrified the engineer. "It is a software conflict, Your Highness. The gyroscopic stabilizers are fighting the magnetic field regulators. We have tried recalibrating the core algorithm 40 times. The system keeps rejecting our inputs." "Then override it manually," Hamdan snapped. "We cannot," Kruger said, and there was genuine despair in his voice. "The servo motors are fused. We tried to force the system electronically so many times that we burned out the mechanical override. The master flux nut is locked. It cannot be turned by computer anymore." "Then turn it by hand." Kruger laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Your Highness, the torque required is 400 foot-pounds. It would take a hydraulic wrench and a very strong man just to move it. And even if we could turn it, we would need to know exactly which direction, exactly how many degrees, or we make it worse. The margin for error is... He trailed off, looking at his screen. There is no margin for error. Hamdan looked around the observation deck. This room had been designed to host weddings, corporate events, celebrations of human achievement. The walls were white marble veined with gold. The furniture was custom-made in Milan. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, each one worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. Even the air smelled expensive, filtered and perfumed to smell like jasmine and success, and in 4 hours all of it would be rubble. Through the window, Hamdan could see the other engineers scrambling around the exterior service platform, 47 of them. PhDs from the best universities in the world, contractors who'd built the Burj Khalifa, the Shanghai Tower, the One World Trade Center, men and women who dedicated their lives to understanding physics and making the impossible real, and every single one of them was failing. "How long?" Hamdan asked quietly. Kruger checked his tablet. "At the current rate of oscillation increase, we have approximately 3 hours and 20 minutes before critical failure. But Your Highness, long before that, the building will become too unstable to safely evacuate. We should leave now. We should leave right now." "No." "Your Highness?" "I said no." Hamdan walked back to the window, pressing his palm against the cool glass. Below he could see the construction crews that had worked on this building. Thousands of men who'd spent years welding steel and pouring concrete and installing systems they barely understood. Men who'd believed in his vision because he'd paid them to believe, and now he was going to kill them all because he'd been too arrogant to admit that some things couldn't be bought. The building shuddered. A deep, groaning sound rolled through the structure, metal flexing under stress it wasn't designed to bear. One of the younger engineers yelped and grabbed onto a support beam. A coffee cup slid off a desk and shattered on the marble floor. "The harmonics are degrading!" someone shouted from the control station. "We're losing magnetic cohesion on the eastern quadrant." Hamdan could feel it now. A sensation like being on a boat in rough water. A subtle rocking that his inner ear registered even though his eyes insisted the floor was level. The building was swaying, gently, almost imperceptibly, but definitely swaying. Somewhere far below in the guts of the structure, something was going horribly wrong. And $12 billion, 47 PhDs, and all the arrogance in the world couldn't stop it. 400 meters below the failing Pearl, in the cramped maintenance corridors where the building's guts were exposed, Cadence Vance heard the building dying. Most people couldn't hear it. The hum was too low, too subtle, buried under the mechanical roar of air handlers and cooling systems. But Cadence had synesthesia for electromagnetic fields. She experienced electricity the way other people experienced music. And right now, the Pearl was playing a funeral march. The corridor was narrow, barely wide enough for her small frame to navigate between the massive cooling pipes that kept the superconducting magnets at negative 180 degrees Celsius. The smell was overwhelming. Industrial lubricant, ozone from the electrical transformers, and the metallic tang of superheated air that leaked through worn gaskets. The floor vibrated under her worn sneakers, a rhythm that should have been steady but kept skipping beats like a damaged heart. Cadence pressed her hand against one of the cooling pipes. Through the metal, she could feel the magnetic field fluctuating. It should have been a smooth wave, consistent and strong. Instead, it pulsed erratically, surging and dropping in a pattern that made her chest tighten with anxiety. The building was tilting. Not much, maybe 4 degrees, but enough that the eastern magnetic array was overcompensating, which was making the western array undercompensate, which was creating a feedback loop that would tear the whole system apart. She'd known this was coming for 3 days. She'd felt the harmonics degrading, heard the discordant notes creeping into what should have been a perfect C major chord, but nobody listened to unauthorized 11-year-olds who lived in utility closets. Cadence's home was 30 meters down the corridor, a storage room that her Aunt Maria had claimed 8 months ago when they'd arrived in Dubai, with nothing but 2 garbage bags of clothes and a stack of her father's old university textbooks. The room was 2 meters by 3 meters, barely large enough for the 2 sleeping mats on the floor and the plastic crate that held everything they owned. Her aunt was supposed to be here. She scrubbed floors on the 14th level, worked doubles whenever the building needed extra cleaning before inspections. But when the evacuation alarm had sounded 20 minutes ago, Maria had fled with the other service workers, assuming Cadence was somewhere safe. Cadence hadn't fled. She couldn't. Because if the pearl fell, it wouldn't just crush the city blocks below. The magnetic coils would catastrophically discharge, sending 40,000 tons of building material down onto the underground workers' quarters where hundreds of people lived. People like Maria. People who'd been invisible their entire lives and would die invisible too. She grabbed her backpack from the storage room, checking the contents. A digital multimeter she'd built from a gutted Game Boy, wire cutters, electrical tape, a collection of rare earth magnets scavenged from the e-waste dumps outside the city, and her father's textbook, Advanced Electromagnetic Field Theory, held together with duct tape and love. Robert Vance had been a professor once before his research on magnetic levitation had been stolen by a corporation that left him with nothing but a heart condition and broken dreams. He died 2 years ago in a labor camp in Kazakhstan, still believing that science could change the world if only the right people were paying attention. Cadence had inherited his mind and his curse. She saw patterns in electromagnetic fields the way her father had. She understood the mathematics intuitively, could calculate flux density in her head while other kids her age were still learning multiplication tables. She'd built a water purifier for their storage room using parts from a broken air conditioner and a microwave magnetron, creating a system that used electromagnetic resonance to separate contaminants from drinking water. But none of that mattered to people like Sheikh Hamdan or Dr. Kruger. To them, she was invisible, a child who shouldn't exist in their pristine world of money and credentials. The building shuddered violently. Somewhere above, metal shrieked against metal. Cadence felt the magnetic field spike, saw the lights flicker as power surged through the system. She made her decision. The central shaft was the only physical connection between the ground and the pearl. A massive column that housed the primary power cables and the emergency service ladder. The ladder was never supposed to be used. It existed only as a last resort escape route. 600 meters of vertical steel rungs that climbed through darkness and danger. Cadence approached the access hatch and yanked it open. Cold air blasted her face, carrying the smell of lubricant and fear. She could see the ladder disappearing upward into shadows, illuminated every 50 meters by emergency lights that cast everything in sickly green. She started climbing. The first 100 meters weren't terrible. Her arms were strong from hauling water buckets and climbing through maintenance shafts, but by 200 meters, her hands were cramping. By 300 meters, blisters had formed on her palms and burst, leaving raw flesh that screamed every time she gripped the next rung. The temperature dropped as she climbed higher. The shaft wasn't insulated properly, and the air grew colder as she approached the superconducting magnets. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps that turned to fog in front of her face. Sweat froze on her skin. Her fingers went numb. At 450 meters, she had to stop. Her vision was swimming. Her legs were shaking so badly she could barely keep her feet on the rungs. She pressed her forehead against the cold metal of the ladder and tried not to think about the drop below her. One slip. That's all it would take. One moment of weakness, and she'd fall for 7 seconds before hitting bottom. But above her, she could hear the building groaning. The harmonics were getting worse. The D-sharp note was sliding toward D natural, which meant the eastern magnets were failing completely. She had maybe 20 minutes. Cadence kept climbing. Her hands were bleeding now, leaving red smears on the ladder rungs. Every breath felt like inhaling broken glass. Her vision narrowed to just the next rung, then the next, then the next. She stopped thinking about the destination and focused only on movement. Reach, grip, pull, breathe. Reach, grip, pull, breathe. At 580 meters, she heard voices above her. Panicked shouting in English and Arabic, the whine of the magnetic coils reaching critical stress, and underneath it all, that terrible discordant hum that sounded like the building was crying. 20 meters left, 15, 10. Her hand hit the top of the ladder. She grabbed the emergency release handle for the service hatch and pulled with the last of her strength. The hatch popped open, spilling bright light and warm air into the shaft. Cadence dragged herself through the opening and collapsed on the marble floor of the Pearl's main lobby. She lay there for 10 seconds, gasping, her whole body shaking with exhaustion. Her NASA t-shirt, a gift from her father that she wore every day, was soaked with sweat and torn at the shoulder. Her cargo pants were covered in grease and hydraulic fluid. Her hands left bloody prints on the white marble. Slowly, she pushed herself to her knees, then to her feet. The lobby was empty. Security had evacuated. The reception desk was abandoned. Coffee cups sat half empty on desks, paperwork scattered where people had dropped it and run, but she could hear voices, shouting, coming from the observation deck. Cadence pulled the multimeter from her backpack and turned it on. The magnetic field reading made her stomach drop. 4.7 degrees of drift. They had minutes, not hours. She walked toward the voices, leaving a trail of bloody footprints on marble floors that cost more per square foot than most people earned in a month. "We have to eject the stabilizing core," Dr. Kruger was screaming into his headset. "It's the only way to prevent catastrophic discharge." "If you eject the core, the building drops instantly," Sheikh Hamdan shouted back. "Everyone in the underground quarters dies." "Don't eject the core." The voice was small, American, and absolutely certain. It cut through the panic like a blade. Every person in the observation deck spun around. Standing in the doorway was a child. A girl, maybe 11 years old, skinny as a rail, covered in grease and blood. Her wild, curly hair was plastered to her forehead with sweat. Her clothes looked like they'd been pulled from a donation bin and then dragged through an engine room. The NASA logo on her t-shirt was peeling off, half the letters already gone. She was holding what looked like a homemade device, wires and circuit boards held together with electrical tape. "Invert the polarity on ring 4 manually," Cadence said, walking toward the control console. Her legs were shaking, but her voice was steady. "The sensors are dirty. They think the building is tilting left, so they're pushing right. But the building is actually tilting right. You're pushing it off the ledge." For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then Kruger exploded. "Who is this?" he shrieked, his face turning purple. "Security! How did a street child get into this building?" "Security left, genius," Cadence said flatly. She didn't look at him. She was studying the readouts on the control console, her eyes moving across the displays with the focus of someone who actually understood what she was seeing. "Your entire team abandoned you the second it got dangerous." Hamdan stared at this impossible child who'd appeared from nowhere, like an answer to a prayer he hadn't known how to pray. She was shaking, violently shaking. But not from fear, from exhaustion, from adrenaline, from climbing 600 meters to reach a place she had no right to be. "What did you say about Ring 4? Hamdan asked quietly. Kruger's hysterical laugh filled the room. "Your Highness, you cannot be serious. This is a street rat who probably can't even read. She's going to lecture me about magnetic flux. I have a doctorate from Technical University of Berlin. I've published 40 papers on electromagnetic—" "Can't you hear them?" Cadence interrupted, tilting her head. "The tertiary coils, they're screaming." "What are you talking about?" Kruger demanded. "The high-frequency oscillation, right there." She pointed toward the eastern wall, even though there was nothing visible to point at. "The coils are out of phase. They're fighting each other. That's why your software can't fix it. You're trying to solve a hardware problem with code." She walked to the window and pressed her hand against the glass, closing her eyes. "The building isn't tilting the way your sensors say it is. The sandstorms last week shifted the outer casing by 3.7 millimeters. Your sensors detected the shift and tried to compensate, but they overcorrected. Now they're stuck in a feedback loop, pushing harder every time the building tries to self-correct." Kruger was staring at her like she'd started speaking in tongues. That's not... How could you possibly... "I can hear it," Cadence said simply. She opened her eyes and looked at Hamdan. "I have synesthesia for electromagnetic fields. Your building is supposed to sound like a C major chord. Right now it sounds like someone strangling a violin." The building shuddered again, harder this time. The lights flickered. Someone's laptop slid off a desk and crashed to the floor. 4.9 degrees, one of the remaining engineers shouted. We're at critical. Hamdan looked at this child, this impossible, bloody, exhausted child who'd somehow climbed into his disaster and started giving orders. He thought about the 47 PhDs who'd failed, the billions of dollars that couldn't solve this, the experts who'd run away the moment it got dangerous. He was a gambler, always had been. He bet on horses, on oil futures, on wind farms and solar arrays and technologies that didn't exist yet. His entire fortune was built on recognizing when the safe bet was actually the stupid bet. And right now, every instinct in his body was screaming that this dirty child was the only real chance he had. What do you need? Hamdan asked. I need the key to the heavy tools locker, Cadence said, and I need everyone to shut up and let me work. The manual override chamber was never meant for human beings. It was a maintenance access point designed for robotic servos, a circular room 4 meters in diameter buried in the heart of the Pearl's magnetic array. The walls were lined with copper shielding that hummed with induced current. The air smelled like burning metal and ozone, so thick it coated the back of your throat. And the sound was like standing inside a transformer station during a lightning strike. Cadence stepped through the pressure-sealed door and immediately felt the magnetic field trying to rip the metal zipper off her backpack. She'd left everything ferrous outside except for the tools she absolutely needed. Even her blood, iron-rich from months of malnutrition, seemed to vibrate in her veins. In the center of the chamber, mounted on a titanium pedestal, sat the Master Flux nut. It was massive, 30 centimeters across, machined from a single piece of aerospace-grade titanium, with teeth cut so precisely that they could only be turned in 0.1 degree increments. This single bolt controlled the angle of the primary magnetic array. Turn it left, the building tilted west. Turn it right, the building tilted east. Right now, it needed to turn exactly 4.7 degrees counterclockwise. The problem was that it required 400 foot-pounds of torque to move, and the servo motor that was supposed to provide that force was a melted lump of plastic and copper, destroyed by Kruger's team's desperate attempts to force it electronically. One of Hamdan's aides had retrieved the hydraulic torque multiplier from the heavy tools locker. The man set it on the floor next to Cadence with a grunt of effort. The tool was a monster. 40 pounds of industrial-grade steel and hydraulic pistons, designed for men who worked on oil rigs and suspension bridges. The instruction manual recommended a 2-person team. The warning label said it could generate enough force to snap a human arm like a twig. Cadence stared at it. The tool was half her body weight. She'd never even held one before. She'd only seen diagrams in her father's books, theoretical discussions of torque multiplication and reaction arms. This is insane, Kruger said from the doorway. He'd followed her down, unable to resist the morbid fascination of watching this street child fail. Even if you could lift that tool, you cannot hold the reaction point. The magnetic field will fight you. The torque will throw you across the room. Then I'll anchor it, Cadence said. She grabbed the tool's handle and lifted. Her arms screamed in protest. The blisters on her palms tore open, fresh blood making the grip slippery. But she got it off the ground. She dragged it to the pedestal, every muscle in her small body shaking with effort. The magnetic field was already pulling at the steel components, trying to yank the tool toward the copper shielding. It was like wrestling an animal that was trying to escape. The building is at 4.9 degrees, someone shouted from the control room. The voice came through an intercom speaker, tinny and distorted. The magnetic lock is failing. We have maybe 5 minutes. Cadence positioned the hydraulic wrench's socket over the Master Flux nut. The fit was perfect. The socket dropped onto the titanium teeth with a satisfying click that she felt through her bones. Now came the hard part. The tool had a reaction arm, a long steel bar that needed to be braced against something immovable to prevent the entire wrench from spinning instead of the bolt. In a normal installation, you'd bolt it to the floor. But there was no time for that. And no way her 70-pound body could provide enough counterforce unless she used the room itself. Cadence wedged the reaction arm against the copper shielding on the wall, then positioned her body between the arm and the pedestal. She planted her feet against the base of the platform, her back pressed against the wall, creating a human brace. "You will be crushed," Kruger said, and for the first time there was something other than contempt in his voice, fear, maybe even concern. "The forces involved will—" "I know the math," Cadence interrupted. She gripped the hydraulic handle with both bleeding hands. 400 foot-pounds distributed across a reaction arm with a 2.1 gear ratio means 200 pounds of force. I can hold 200 pounds for the 3 seconds it takes to crack the seal. "In theory," Kruger whispered. "Physics doesn't care about theory," Cadence said, "only proof." She pulled the trigger. The hydraulic system engaged with a hiss of pressurized fluid. The tool bucked in her hands like a living thing. The reaction arm slammed against her shoulder, pinning her between steel and copper. She felt her shoulder blade compress, felt ribs flex under pressure that shouldn't be possible for a child her size to survive. The bolt didn't move. Cadence pulled harder. The hydraulic pressure gauge climbed. 100 pounds, 200 pounds, 300 pounds. The tool was screaming now, metal grinding against metal, the sound competing with the roar of the magnetic field. The bolt still didn't move. "It's fused," Kruger shouted. "The thermal stress has welded it in place. You cannot—" "Critical failure in 60 seconds." The intercom voice was pure panic now. "The eastern array is collapsing. We're losing magnetic cohesion." The building lurched. Cadence felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Somewhere far above, glass shattered. The emergency alarms screamed to life, a deafening wail that made thinking almost impossible. She pulled with everything she had. Her vision started to gray at the edges. Blood ran down her arms from her torn palms, dripping onto the titanium pedestal. The tool vibrated so hard it felt like her teeth would shake loose from her skull. Nothing. "Give up," Kruger was screaming. "The building is falling. We have to evacuate. We have to—" And then Cadence heard it. Through the chaos and the alarms and Kruger's panic, she heard her father's voice. Not a memory, not imagination, but the actual words he'd spoken to her when she was 9 years old, showing her how to align magnets for her first homemade motor. "Don't fight the field, Cadence. Guide it. The magnet wants to find center. Your job is just to show it the way." She stopped pulling. The building was swaying now, rocking back and forth as the magnetic arrays fought each other. She could feel the rhythm of it through the floor. Sway left, sway right, sway left, sway right. 40,000 tons of building, oscillating like a pendulum, and if she timed it perfectly. Cadence watched the hydraulic pressure gauge, listened to the groan of the structure, felt the sway in her bones. Left, right, left, right. She had to turn the bolt counterclockwise, which meant she needed the building to sway clockwise just for a moment, just enough that the 40,000 tons of mass would help her instead of fighting her. 30 seconds, the intercom screamed. The building swayed left, then started to swing back right. Now, Cadence threw her entire body weight onto the hydraulic handle at the exact millisecond the building reached the peak of its rightward swing. For one perfect instant, the magnetic field wanted to go the same direction she was pulling. For one perfect instant, 40,000 tons of momentum added itself to her 70 pounds of desperate strength. Crack! The sound was like a gunshot in the enclosed space. The rusted thermal seal around the master flux nut shattered. The bolt spun 4.7 degrees counterclockwise in one smooth motion. The hydraulic wrench, suddenly free of resistance, bucked violently. The reaction arm slipped. The tool flew from Cadence's hands and slammed into the copper shielding with a crash that sounded like a car accident. And Cadence collapsed. She hit the floor hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs. Her arms were shaking so violently she couldn't control them. Her shoulder felt like someone had tried to tear it from the socket. Her hands were ruined, palms raw and bleeding, fingers cramping into claws. But above her, the emergency lights shifted from red to green. The alarm cut off mid-wail, leaving a silence so profound it felt like pressure, and through that silence, Cadence heard the most beautiful sound in the world. C major, perfect, harmonious. The song of 847 magnetic coils working in flawless synchronization. The building had stopped swaying. The silence in the observation deck was absolute. Dr. Kruger stood frozen in the doorway of the manual override chamber, staring at the green status lights like they were a hallucination. His mouth was open. His tablet hung forgotten in his hand. He looked like a man whose entire understanding of reality had just been rewritten. Sheikh Hamdan's hands were gripping the edge of the control console so hard his knuckles had gone white. He was staring at the holographic display where the red warning lines had vanished, replaced by a stable green grid that showed perfect magnetic alignment. 4.7 degrees of drift, corrected. Eastern array, stabilized. Magnetic lock, engaged. Structural integrity, 100%. The air conditioning hummed softly. The familiar, comfortable C major harmony filled the room like a choir singing after a funeral. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Dubai sparkled in the afternoon sun, completely unaware that it had been 60 seconds away from catastrophe. One of the younger engineers let out a sob of relief, then another. Within seconds, 3 grown men were crying openly, hugging each other, laughing with the manic energy of people who just escaped death. But Hamdan didn't move. He kept staring at the green lights, then at the manual override chamber, then back at the lights. A child, an 11-year-old unauthorized resident, a girl who'd appeared out of nowhere covered in blood and grease. She had done what 47 PhDs couldn't. She had physically wrestled 40,000 tons of building into submission using nothing but her mind and her broken body. She had saved them all. Hamdan walked toward the chamber on legs that felt disconnected from his brain. Kruger stepped aside wordlessly, his face the color of old paper. Cadence was still on the floor. She'd managed to roll onto her side, gasping for air, her whole body shaking with exhaustion. The NASA shirt was torn completely now, hanging off one shoulder. Her cargo pants were soaked with sweat and blood. Her hands looked like they'd been fed through a grinder, but her eyes, her dark, intelligent eyes, were alert, watching, calculating. "You," Hamdan started, then stopped. He didn't know what to say. "Thank you" felt impossibly inadequate. How did you thank someone for preventing the apocalypse? What words existed for that? Cadence sat up slowly, wincing as her shoulder moved. "You were trying to solve a feeling with a number," she said, her voice raspy from screaming. "That's why you failed." "What?" "The sensors were telling you what they saw, but they couldn't feel what was wrong." She wiped blood from her palm onto her pants. "The building was screaming, you just needed to listen." Hamdan stared at her. This child, this impossible, brilliant child, had understood his $12 billion building better than anyone he'd ever hired. She'd climbed 600 meters through darkness and pain. She'd risked being crushed. She'd succeeded where experts had failed. And she'd done it while invisible, unauthorized, unwanted. He felt something crack open in his chest, something that might have been shame. "The money," Hamdan said abruptly. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands. $100 million. I swore it on my father's life. I will make the transfer right now. What is your account? "Keep your cash," Cadence interrupted. Hamdan froze. "What?" "I don't want money." Cadence pushed herself to her feet, swaying slightly but refusing to fall. "If you give me cash, people will just try to take it. I'm 11 years old. I'm an unauthorized resident. I have no legal guardian. The system will eat me alive, and your 100 million will be gone in a year while lawyers fight over who gets to control the poor orphan's fortune." The analysis was delivered with such cold, strategic clarity that Hamdan felt his perspective shift again. This wasn't just an intelligent child. This was someone who understood power, who'd already calculated 3 moves ahead while everyone else was still processing the present. "Then what do you want?" Hamdan asked. Cadence met his eyes. "My father was Robert Vance. He wrote the foundational theory on magnetic levitation stability. The math you used to make this building work, that was his. Companies stole his research, published it under their own names. He died poor while people like you built empires on his ideas." Hamdan felt ice settle in his stomach. He knew the Vance papers. Every engineer working on magnetic levitation knew them. They were foundational, revolutionary. He'd never thought about who'd written them, never cared. "I want you to buy back his patents," Cadence said. "All of them. Track down every company that used his work without credit, buy the rights, put them in my name. That will cost less than the building you would have lost. Cadence cut him off. And I want the old warehouse, the one at the base of this tower, the maintenance facility that's scheduled for demolition. Why would you want a warehouse? To build a lab. The fire in her eyes intensified. For kids like me, kids who can solve problems but don't have degrees, kids who know how to work with their hands, who understand systems, who can hear the buildings singing. No PhDs allowed, only skills. The words hung in the air. Hamdan looked at this small, bloody, brilliant girl who was negotiating with him like an equal, who just saved his legacy and was using that leverage not for personal wealth, but for systemic change. She was 11 years old and thinking like a revolutionary. You want to change who gets access to knowledge, Hamdan said slowly. I want to change who gets seen, Cadence corrected. There are hundreds of kids in this city who could solve impossible problems, but they're invisible because they're poor or young or don't have the right papers. Your system wastes them. I want to build a system that finds them. Hamdan thought about the maintenance workers who'd built this building, the invisible hands that installed every magnet, every wire, every system. He thought about the cleaning crews, the service workers, the people he passed every day without seeing. How many of them were brilliant? How many had gifts like cadences that were going to waste because no one bothered to look? He was a businessman, a gambler, a man who built his fortune on recognizing value before anyone else did. And right now, standing in front of him was the most valuable asset he'd ever encountered. Not because of what she'd done, but because of what she represented. The potential that existed in every overlooked corner of the world, if only someone had the vision to find it. The patents, the warehouse, full legal protection. Hamdan pulled out his phone again. I will have my lawyers draw up the contracts. You will own your father's legacy, and the warehouse is yours to do with as you see fit. With one condition, Cadence added. Name it. I run the lab, not you, not your people. Me. She lifted her chin. You provide resources. You open doors. But you don't control what we build or who we teach. This isn't charity, it's investment. In the intelligence you've been stepping over your entire life. Hamdan stared at her. Then, slowly, he smiled. It was the first genuine smile he'd felt in years. Not the practiced smile he used for cameras or business meetings, but real joy at recognizing something extraordinary. You remind me of myself, he said, when I was young and thought I could change the world. The difference, Cadence said, is that you thought money could change the world. I know talent can. You just have to stop being blind to it. Somewhere above them, they heard the sound of helicopter rotors. The king was arriving, right on schedule. Hamdan extended his hand to Cadence. She looked at it for a moment. This clean, manicured hand offered to her bloody, broken one, then gripped it firmly. Deal, she said. And Sheikh Hamdan Al Maktoum, one of the wealthiest men in the world, shook hands with an 11-year-old girl who just taught him the most expensive lesson of his life. That genius doesn't come from credentials or money or access. It comes from desperation and brilliance meeting in the same moment. And if you're wise enough to recognize it when it appears, it will save your world. The Global Energy Summit in Singapore hosted 4,000 of the world's most powerful people. Prime ministers, CEOs of Fortune 100 companies, Nobel laureates, investors who controlled trillions in capital. They sat in an auditorium that cost $300 million to build, waiting to hear from the youngest keynote speaker in the summit's 40-year history. Cadence Vance walked onto the stage wearing a tailored charcoal suit that had been custom-made in Milan. The jacket fit perfectly across her shoulders, the kind of tailoring that whispered wealth without shouting it. The pants broke exactly right over her shoes, except her shoes weren't Italian leather. They were the same scuffed black combat boots she'd been wearing for 6 years, the ones she'd bought with her first paycheck from the Vance Initiative, the ones that reminded her where she came from every time she stepped into rooms like this. At 17, Cadence had grown into the intelligence that had always been visible in her eyes. She was still small, still carried the leanness of someone who'd known real hunger, But she moved with the absolute confidence of someone who'd wrestled buildings into submission and won. 6 years ago, Cadence began, her voice carrying across the auditorium without needing amplification. A billion-dollar building almost fell because the people in charge forgot how to listen. The audience shifted. This wasn't the opening they'd expected. Corporate keynotes usually started with thank yous and platitudes. This felt more like an accusation. The experts had PhDs from the best universities in the world, Cadence continued. They had equipment worth millions. They had every advantage money could buy, and they failed. Not because they weren't smart, but because they'd convinced themselves that intelligence only exists in people who look like them, talk like them, and have the same credentials they do. Behind her, the massive screen lit up with an image, the sky pearl gleaming in the Dubai sun. Then the image shifted to show a graph. The magnetic oscillation data from that day 6 years ago. The red warning lines, the countdown to catastrophic failure. An 11-year-old girl with bloody hands and a homemade multimeter solved that problem in 90 seconds, Cadence said. Not because she was special, but because she could. Hear what everyone else was too educated to notice. In the front row, Sheikh Hamdan Al Maktoum sat perfectly still. He was 51 now, his beard graying at the edges, but his eyes were as sharp as ever, and they were locked on Cadence with the fierce pride of someone watching their best investment exceed every projection. That girl was me, Cadence said, and I'm not telling you this story to impress you with how smart I was. I'm telling you because that same day, in that same city, there were 200 other kids just as smart as me. Kids who understood electrical systems, fluid dynamics, structural engineering, kids who built water purifiers from trash and repaired diesel engines by ear, kids who could have solved impossible problems. She paused, letting the silence hang. Nobody asked them because nobody saw them. The screen changed again. This time it showed the Vance Initiative headquarters. The old warehouse at the base of the Sky Pearl transformed into something that looked more like a dreamscape than an educational facility. Massive, open workshops filled with equipment, 3D printers, CNC machines, clean rooms for electronics assembly, and everywhere young people working, building, testing, failing, succeeding. The Vance Initiative started with a simple idea, Cadence said. Find the invisible geniuses. The kids working in e-waste dumps who understand circuit design better than electrical engineers. The children of migrant workers who can calculate load-bearing capacity in their heads. The homeless teenagers who've built survival systems from scavenged parts. Numbers appeared on the screen: 12,147 students from 67 countries, zero tuition. Zero requirements except demonstrable skill, $4.2 billion in economic value, generated 1,847 patents, filed 94 companies founded. We don't ask for transcripts, Cadence explained. We don't care about grades or test scores or recommendations. We ask one question, show us what you can build. And then we give them tools, mentors, and the freedom to solve real problems. The screen shifted to show a young woman, maybe 14, standing in front of a water filtration system. The text identified her as Amara Osman, Sudan. Amara grew up in a refugee camp where clean water came from trucks once a week, Cadence said. She built a solar-powered filtration system using sand, charcoal, and UV LEDs salvaged from broken phones. Her system now provides clean water to 40,000 people across East Africa. She's 14 years old. No engineering degree, just brilliance and desperation meeting in the same moment. The audience was leaning forward now. The skepticism had shifted to something else. Interest, maybe even hunger. Another image, a teenage boy standing next to a small building. The text read, Carlos Mendez, Chile, 16 years old. Carlos lived through the 8.8 magnitude earthquake in 2010, Cadence continued. He watched buildings collapse while others stood. He started studying structural engineering using library books and YouTube videos. At 13, he designed a low-cost earthquake-resistant housing system using bamboo and recycled plastic. His designs are now being used to rebuild communities across South America. The construction cost is $2,000 per home. Traditional earthquake-resistant housing costs $40,000. More images, more stories, more names. Yuki Tanaka, 15 Tokyo, created a crowd density monitoring system that prevents dangerous crushes at transit stations, now used in 200 cities worldwide. Ibrahim Hassan, 12 Cairo, developed a low-cost desalination membrane using graphene oxide and bacterial cellulose, patent licensed to 3 major water companies. Priya Patel, 16 Mumbai, built an AI system that predicts electrical grid failures 48 hours in advance, prevented 23 blackouts in the first year of deployment. These kids didn't need permission to be brilliant, Cadence said. They needed someone to see them, to give them resources, to trust that intelligence isn't a privilege of wealth. It's a human characteristic that exists everywhere if you're willing to look. She walked to the edge of the stage, looking directly at the audience. This room controls $18 trillion in capital, she said. You make decisions about which ideas get funded, which people get opportunities, which problems get solved. And I'm here to tell you that you're missing 99% of the world's genius because you're only looking in 1% of the places. The bluntness landed like a punch. A few executives shifted uncomfortably, others nodded slowly. The Vance Initiative proves something simple, Cadence continued. Talent is universal. Opportunity is not. A kid in a slum in Lagos has the same probability of being brilliant as a kid at Exeter Academy. The difference isn't potential, it's access. And every day that we waste that potential is a day we don't solve climate change or water scarcity or the next pandemic or the 1,000 other problems that need minds we're currently throwing away. Sheikh Hamdan was smiling now, that sharp, predatory smile of someone who'd recognized value before the market did. 6 years ago, he'd bet on an 11-year-old girl. That bet had returned 42 times his initial investment. Not in money, though there was plenty of that, but in proof that his entire worldview had been wrong. Physics doesn't care about your bank account, Cadence said, and her voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. It doesn't care about your last name or your zip code or which university accepted you. It only cares about truth. And the truth is that there are millions of kids like Amara, like Carlos, like Yuki and Ibrahim and Priya, kids who can solve impossible problems, kids who are currently invisible. She paused, letting that sink in. The question isn't whether they exist. The question is whether you're brave enough to find them, whether you're willing to admit that the systems you've built to identify talent are actually just systems that identify privilege, whether you're ready to do the uncomfortable work of looking in places you've been trained to ignore. The screen behind her went dark except for one line of text. When brilliance is universal but opportunity is rare, the world runs on wasted potential. 6 years ago, I was wasted potential, Cadence said quietly. I was a tool waiting to be used, a solution looking for a problem, an answer that nobody bothered to hear because they didn't think to ask the question. She looked directly at Hamdan. One person saw me, one person took a chance, one person was willing to admit that maybe, just maybe, a dirty kid covered in blood might know something that 47 PhDs didn't. The auditorium was absolutely silent. I'm asking you to be that person, Cadence said. Not for me, but for the next generation of invisible geniuses who are waiting for someone, anyone to see them, to trust them, to give them the tools and the freedom to build the future you keep saying you want. She stepped back from the edge of the stage. The Vance Initiative is proof of concept. We've shown it works. We've shown that intelligence without credentials can solve problems that credentialed intelligence can't. Now, the question is whether the rest of the world is ready to learn the lesson. The standing ovation started with Hamdan. He rose to his feet, clapping with the enthusiasm of someone who'd watched a risky investment become a revolution. Then the rest of the front row stood, then the entire auditorium, 4,000 of the most powerful people in the world, standing and applauding a 17-year-old girl who just told them they'd been doing everything wrong. Cadence stood in the center of the stage, combat boots planted firmly, and accepted the applause with the same strategic calculation she brought to everything else. This wasn't about ego. This was about leverage. Every person in this room now knew about the Vance Initiative. Every person in this room had just been challenged to prove they were brave enough to change. And some of them, maybe 1%, maybe 5%, maybe more, would take that challenge. That was enough. That was how revolutions started. Not with everyone believing, just with enough people being willing to try. Today, the Vance Initiative operates in 23 countries. The original warehouse in Dubai has been joined by facilities in Lagos, São Paulo, Mumbai, Jakarta, and 18 other cities. Each one follows the same model. Find the invisible, give them tools, get out of their way. Cadence still runs the initiative from the Dubai headquarters. She's 17, which means she's technically too young to hold the CEO position according to corporate law. So, officially, she's the Chief Innovation Officer. Unofficially, everyone knows she makes every major decision, approves every new facility, interviews every potential student. She still wears the combat boots, still lives in a modest apartment near the warehouse, still remembers what hunger feels like, what it means to be invisible, what it costs to climb 600 meters through darkness, because no one else will. The initiative's current projects include a biodegradable plastic developed by a 15-year-old in Manila using cassava starch and bacterial enzymes, already being tested by 3 major packaging companies. A low-cost diagnostic tool for early-stage cancer detection, created by a 16-year-old in Nairobi who watched her mother die from undiagnosed cervical cancer. Accuracy rate, 94%. Cost per test, $30. An atmospheric water harvesting system designed by a 13-year-old in Phoenix who understood that the desert air held more moisture than people realized, now providing drinking water to 12 communities across the American Southwest. These aren't charity projects. These are businesses, patents, solutions that generate real economic value. The initiative takes a 10% equity stake in every company its students found. That stake gets reinvested into finding more students, building more facilities, solving more problems. It's a flywheel that runs on the fuel of wasted potential finally being used. But the real lesson of the Vance Initiative isn't about money or patents or even the specific problems being solved. The real lesson is simpler and harder and more important than any of that. Intelligence exists everywhere, everywhere, in every slum, every refugee camp, every forgotten corner of every city in the world. Kids who can see patterns that experts miss. Kids who understand systems intuitively because their survival depended on it. Kids who are currently sorting through e-waste or cleaning floors or living invisible lives while their brilliance goes to waste. Cadence changed the world because one person saw potential where others saw only poverty. One person was willing to admit he might be wrong about who deserved a chance. One person took the risk of trusting someone who looked nothing like what genius was supposed to look like. Sheikh Hamdan had been that person for Cadence. And now Cadence has been that person for 12,147 students and counting. But here's the thing. Right now in your community, wherever you're watching this from, there's another Cadence, another kid who can solve impossible problems if someone just gives them the chance. Another young person who's been dismissed, overlooked, underestimated because they don't have the right credentials or the right background or the right last name. They're there. The question is whether you're going to see them. This isn't a request to donate money or sign a petition. This is a challenge to fundamentally change how you think about intelligence and potential and who deserves opportunities. Look differently at the people you've been trained to ignore. The kid working at the convenience store who's teaching themselves quantum physics on YouTube. The teenager in your neighborhood who fixes everyone's electronics for free. The young person everyone dismisses as just a dropout who understands systems in ways that make experts uncomfortable. Those people aren't waiting to be saved. They're waiting to be seen. They're waiting for someone to hand them tools instead of pity. They're waiting for someone to trust that their hands-on knowledge might be worth more than someone else's expensive degree. Share this story, not because it's inspiring, but because it's proof. Proof that the genius we need to solve the world's biggest problems isn't locked away in elite institutions. It's everywhere. It's been everywhere the whole time. We've just been too comfortable with our existing systems to bother looking. Demand better from companies that claim they can't find talent, from schools that measure intelligence with standardized tests, from investors who only fund people who went to the right universities, from every system that confuses credentials with capability. The future isn't going to be built by the same people who built the past. It's going to be built by the Cadences and the Amaras and the Carloses and the thousands of other brilliant minds that we're currently wasting because we're too lazy or too scared or too invested in the status quo to see them. Cadence Vance was 11 years old when she saved $1 billion building with nothing but her mind and her broken hands. She was poor, she was unauthorized, she was invisible until she wasn't, and now every single day she makes sure that other invisible kids get the chance to become visible too, to prove that brilliance doesn't require permission, that genius doesn't come from privilege, that the only thing standing between wasted potential and world-changing solutions is whether someone is brave enough to look. When they tell you that you don't belong in the room, build your own building, and when you build it, make sure the doors are wide enough for everyone else who's been told they don't belong. That's the lesson. That's the challenge. That's the future we could have if we're brave enough to stop wasting it.